Talk and Rock Radio, where friends meet at the intersection of life, inspiration, and music. Here's your host, Rick Kern.
When you're alone and life is making you lonely, you can always go downtown. When you've got worries, all the noise and the hurry seems to help, I know. Downtown, just listen to the music of the traffic in the city. Linger on the sidewalk where the neon signs are pretty. How can you lose? The lights are much brighter there. You can't forget all your troubles, forget all your cares, so go downtown. Things will be great when you're downtown. No finer place for sure. Downtown, everything's waiting for you. Downtown. Don't hang around and let your problems surround you. There are movie shows downtown. Maybe you know some little places to go to where they never close. Downtown, just listen to the rhythm of a gentle bossa nova. You'll be dancing with them too before the night is over. Happy again. The lights are much brighter there. You can't forget all your troubles, forget all your cares, so go downtown, where all the lights are bright. Downtown, waiting for you tonight. Downtown, you're gonna be alright now.
Welcome everyone to Talk and Rock Radio. My special guest today is somebody that I met online a few months ago, and it was kind of interesting because I reached out to him and he immediately reached back. And what's interesting about this gentleman is that he's what you call an oral historian. You know, he goes in person and does what I do online, you know, through the power of Zoom and, you know, our digital media and everything that we use these days. But what's interesting about Tom is he's been doing it a lot longer than most podcasters have even been thinking about doing podcasting. And he goes all over the place and interviews amazing people. So I thought what I do today in this episode is to introduce you guys to this new friend of mine. It's pretty interesting. There's more to this story, but anyway, without going into that right now, I'd like to introduce to you all Tom Meros. How you doing, Tom?
I'm doing very well. I'm sitting on the shores of Lake Erie, about 5 miles from the place where Alan Freed launched rock and roll.
That's so cool. That is so cool. Well, a little bit about you. You know, you're an attorney, but I guess you're semi-retired now, right?
Well, I got one big swing at the bat that's coming up on the radar screen that I'm involved in. So,
okay. Well, you know, we're both interested in capturing history and keeping the memories alive and everything. And I got to ask you, what was it that got you inspired to be doing what you're doing now with all these shows and everything?
Well, you have to understand that I'm 74 years old, and since about the age of 4, I can remember hearing my aunts and uncles mention Alan Freed. I can remember the name. Alan Freed had just had that rock and roll concert, the Moondog Coronation Ball here in Cleveland, which turned out to be a disaster. But it was a planned disaster by Alan Freed so that it would get him more airplay, better spots on the radio. It really was a publicity stunt. But I could remember being 4, 5, 6 years old, hearing them talk about Alan Freed and Alan Freed's move to New York City, where he went to WINS 1010. And even though he left Cleveland, he never really left Cleveland behind. His brother lived here. I got to know his brother over the years, and we talked We talked a lot before he died, I think in 1997. What month did he die? I think maybe May. I think it was late May. But David Freed would sit and tell me about growing up with his brother, following in his footsteps. David was not a DJ, but David worked with his brother with the recordings in the record industry. And some of the locations where Alan Freed and Leo Mintz started the rock and roll concert concept still exists right here in downtown Cleveland.
That's incredible. You know, I have such a fond memory of Cleveland. Our band, when I had my show band on the road, Tapestry, we played Masiello's, and I think you and I've talked about that before. I think you
Oh,
know
yeah.
Masiello's was a dinner showroom there in Willoughby, which is a suburb of Cleveland, and I had asked you if by chance you knew of a specific couple, and who I'm talking about is a guy named Bob Gaines and his wife Kitty. They came into the club one night and saw our shows and really liked us and friended us and, you know, wanted to know more about us and everything. And then we learned about him. And next thing I know, my wife and I are going to our very first pro football game. And it was the Cleveland Browns playing the New York Jets. But because of who Bob was, I mean, he was a famous player for the Browns, and he and his wife Kitty invited Sharon and I to go to the game, and we got to sit in the captain's club with them. I know it was cold outside. I don't remember if it was snow, but I do remember it was very cold, but it was toasty warm where we were, a big buffet laid out. It was pretty darn cool to to be able to be there with a football legend that really made his place. He had gotten injured in a Dallas Cowboy game and sustained a multiple compound fracture and basically retired him for life. And so the Dallas Cowboys, who happens to be one of my favorite teams, was not a subject that we would talk very much about.
Now, the Dallas Cowboys played the Cleveland Browns on the morning that Lee Harvey Oswald was shot.
Oh, wow.
And I was at Cleveland Stadium. My brothers and I worked at Cleveland Stadium throughout the 1960s. And my father, when he was a young kid, he worked there. And that's how he got us jobs selling programs. And I'll never forget that. We're in the program room because you go in and get more programs and you go, football program, line up, get the football program. Back then they were 25, 50 cents. And Oswald just got shot on TV, and everybody was talking about that. And everybody had been talking about, should this game even have been played? But I know that Bob Gaines was defensive tackle for the Browns back then in that game.
Wow. Interesting fact.
Yeah.
So but you knew him and Kitty though, right? You had met them?
Oh yeah. I met him many times, many times.
Yeah, they invited us over to their house, and it was really interesting in his den, all across the ceiling, along the edge, all the way on all the walls. He had dollar bills of different people that had come over there to their house and visited and everything with autographs, you know, autographed dollar bills. It was kind of a unique thing, you know. I kept looking for some $100 ones and $50 bills, but I didn't find any.
No, just singles. That's how we do it, Cleveland.
Yeah, just
single
singles.
dollars.
Yeah, that's smart.
Yeah.
Well, the your whole idea of getting involved in interviews, especially live interviews, when did all that start for you? What year? And
Well, it really started in 1992 when I met Dennis Edwards of the Temptations. And Dennis introduced me to a lot of people, and it just kind of expanded from there. And I had some friends out of Chicago, out of Gary, Indiana, that were putting on concerts, and they invited me to their concerts, and I got to meet so many performers. But you have to understand, I have an undergraduate and a graduate degree in American history. I love American history. I appreciate American history because you can't say World War II. I don't love World War II, but I appreciate it. I appreciate what happened. And my father would tell me when I can remember my brothers. I had a brother a year older than me and a brother a year younger. When we'd hear the stories about the war, we'd roll our eyes for the 15th time. And do we have to listen to his dad and our uncles? But now I appreciate those stories so much. And as my father said, when we got out of he was in the Navy, when we got out of the Navy and came home, the Supreme Allied Commander was Eisenhower. And then they elected Eisenhower as their president. Their attitude was, they're still in the service. Everything has to continue to march to the drum beat of being in the armed forces. But then Alan Freed said, wait a minute, there's a different beat, a beat for us kids. And as Jimmy Merchant and Herman Santiago of the Teenagers told me, we called ourselves Teenagers because we wanted everybody to know that rock and roll is for the kids. It's for the teenagers. Well, that was in 1956, January 6th of 56, when they recorded Why Do Fools Fall in Love? And that drum beat, as we younger kids started getting more and more into rock and roll, and our fathers are saying, no. Don't forget Glenn Miller. Don't forget Frank Sinatra. Don't forget all that great music that got us through World War II. Well, Dad, we didn't forget it. We appreciate it. We appreciate what you did, but we got a new beat to march to. And they didn't like that. They didn't like to see their kids going off on their own, thinking on their own, going to college, meeting new people, getting new ideas. And it just started from there.
That's interesting, man. You know what I'm really amazed by how many acts, how many really famous A-list artists that you've interviewed and that I've interviewed some of them. They're from Philadelphia. There's so many of them that are from PA up there.
Oh yeah. The Times. Oh yeah. The Times took me back to the old American Bandstand Studios. When I walked into that place, that was the center of the rock and roll universe back in the late 50s, when Dick Clark was having that on every day. And my father would come home from work and say, turn that rock and roll off, get outside, go play baseball. But Dad, we wanted to watch Little Anthony Imperials. We wanted to watch the Times. You wanted to watch Chubby Checker doing the twist. My father didn't want that. He didn't argue with us, but he let us know that he disapproved.
And, you know, and a lot of those artists, they migrated to LA, the left coast, as I call it.
And I'll be there next month interviewing more in July. I'm excited about that.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that happened, a lot of that migration of entertainers going west was because of the access to the many of the recording studios, of course, and the venues and music opportunities that there were over there that maybe in the Midwest they weren't getting, or of course in New York they were, in Nashville they were, and all that. But I think a lot of that happened much later. I'm talking about the very early part of how much happened in our music history, especially early rock and roll, took place in New York, with Carole King and James Taylor, all of the groups that recorded up there. It's amazing. Well,
before that, the Drifters.
Oh yeah, before that, Joey D, the Starlighters.
Yeah, the Platters. Everybody. The Platters grew out of L.A., but they were the second biggest act of the 50s behind Elvis. And then we get into the racial issues.
Well, and you turned me on to
Willie Chambers.
And I did a wonderful, interview with him. He was such a nice guy. And of course, Joey D, you helped me out getting to Joey. And that was, they're just the salt of the earth. Both of those guys are so nice and very just wanting to keep their, legacies alive and really still doing it. They still perform and still doing their thing, and it's amazing how many of these groups that you and I have had the opportunity to visit with. I was watching one you did last night with Lamont from the Fifth Dimension. And what a neat interview you did with that. And I have a fond memory of the Fifth Dimension because my band in 1974 was playing at the Sahara in Lake Tahoe, and the Fifth Dimension was one of the 5 groups that were there, and we saw them, and just a wonderful show. I've reached out to Marilyn and Billy, and no response back. I know they split from the Fifth Dimension, to take a different career path for themselves, and I understand their show's phenomenal. I've not seen it since they've done their own thing, but I was, researching Florence LaRue last night and looking at some of the stuff that she's done. She's continued that show on with as a name, Florence LaRue, in the Fifth Dimension, and they still perform.
Yeah.
But anyway, that was a wonderful time that year in '74 to be able to see that group. And ironically, the group that I was in right before that, called the Sounds Royale, it was a 5-piece vocal show band with a female, Debbie, was singing with us, and we did one of our opening songs that we did in one of our shows was Up, Up and Away. That was written by Jimmy Webb, and of course, the rest is history. So many different people have covered it, but the Fifth Dimension really put it on the map. And our version of that was very similar. Only the part where there's brass and the brass playing in the song, the original song that the Fifth Dimension did, we're using our voices, in part of that, doing the brass parts.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Sounds Royale. Would you like to ride in my beautiful balloon? Would you like to ride in my beautiful balloon? We could blow the stars together, you and I, and we can fly, we can fly up the way in my beautiful balloon. In my beautiful balloon, where's the nicer place? In my beautiful balloon, we can sail right through the night, then we can fly, up the way in my beautiful balloon. Suspended under twilight canopy, find a cloud to hide us, keep the moon beside us. No, waiting there in my beautiful balloon, way up in the air in my beautiful balloon. You hold my hand when she's on me on my side, then we can fly, up and away in my beautiful balloon.
In 5-part harmony. It was really a neat piece to do. But anyway, without diving too much into what you and I, our inspiration of doing what we do, I think it'd be fun now to just kind of launch into something that you wanted to talk about, and that is a little bit of background with you and Petula Clark.
Well, I'll tell you what. She is at the top of my list when it comes to female performers. I just love her. I love her music. I loved her voice. There are a lot of excellent females whose voices I've loved. But Petula, see, the whole British invasion, to me, was a matter of timing. And Petula was part of that British invasion. But as we all know, the Beatles, Ed Sullivan, that's what started it. Let's back up 1 year, 1963. 1963 was what I consider the most unusual year in rock and roll history. The first #1 song of the year was an instrumental. It came out of England, Telstar, by the Tornadoes. All British, totally a different country. And here we were. We assisted them in World War II, of course, our fathers did, and now we're accepting their music. We want to hear their music, even though they didn't sing, it was still a British song.
That's interesting because what I remember Telstar being is one of the Venture's big hits, but I never knew that it was done
By the
initially.
Tornadoes.
Yeah,
By the,
that's interesting.
by the Tornadoes. And in July of 1963, number one hit, Sukiyaki. Kayushu Sakamoto. He sang the song totally in Spanish. We did not know if he was singing about soup, if he was singing about a relationship. And in fact, it's a very sad song. We don't know that, but we loved it. And just 18 years earlier, we dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan. And now they've come over here to capture our music world totally in Japanese with a number one song. And then at the end of the year, the number one song for a little over 4 weeks was totally in French. We couldn't understand that either. The Singing Nun, Dominique.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And that's because President Kennedy, when he was assassinated on Friday, November 22nd, everything stopped. Music performing, concerts stopped. That day, the Dick Clark Caravan of Stars was in Dallas to do a concert that night. The concert didn't go on. Lenny Welsh told me, Since I Fell for You, he was in the studio. They were just getting ready to record that song when the news came in. Everybody went home. And record sales fell off, which is why Dominique, Dale and Grace had the number one song on that day that President Kennedy was assassinated. I'm leaving it all up to you. But after that, the record sales declined drastically, and all we had left was the Singing Nun, singing in French. So she was number one right until the end of the year when Bobby Vinton came on. I think Bobby Vinton came on at the beginning of 64 into 63 with the number one song. But we were willing to accept music in languages we didn't understand from foreign countries. And then while this country of ours was in a Great Depression after losing the youngest, best looking man ever elected president up until that time, and he took over from the oldest man ever elected president, we thought we were moving into a new direction. The torch had been passed. Now, all of a sudden, we go backwards with Lyndon Johnson, who was almost 10 years older than JFK. And the world is, particularly the US, is in a depression. Bang, the Beatles come over here. They showed us young kids who were sitting on our elbows, watching TV, black and white TV on Ed Sullivan, that we can smile again, we can laugh again, and we can find that youth again. And these kids are just, 20 years old. And they came from another country. Even my parents, my father is Greek, my mother Italian. Their parents came over from Greece and Italy. They were really very old world, but they had to sit with us in front of that TV to see what the magic was all about. And that's when we learned, and we got to see them on TV. And they kept flashing the names. This guy's name is Ringo. And then for John, he's married. They had to let you know that John Lennon was the only Beatle who was off the market. But the other 3, who everybody just loved, including my parents, my aunts and uncles, they didn't want to admit it. But this was something new, and we needed something fresh, only 75 days after President Kennedy's funeral. So it was a real shot that we needed, and we never looked back. And then John Lennon later on in the 1960s said to us, "You say you want a revolution?" And we answered yes. Our fathers didn't like that because we're marching in the streets, we're objecting to the Vietnam War, we're using that rock and roll beat and rock and roll songs. And that's when you think of Willie Chambers and the Chambers Brothers. Time has come today, 1968. And that's really an anthem for the 60s. And when you think of the Vietnam War, what was going on there, and you think of time has come today. So it's something I appreciate. It's something I always say, I didn't get bald and lose my hair and go white overnight. A lot of miles, a lot of history we witnessed.
Hey, man, you're only 1 year older than I am, and we go to the same barber.
You know what? And I don't care. I'm proud of it, because if I had a black toupee and I looked like I was born in 1998, then I couldn't really be speaking about music history like I really witnessed it and envisioned it, because we saw it. We saw it all. I say that the rock and roll golden era, golden age of rock and roll began in September of 1954, Earth Angel. That to me, I visited the house out there, Ted Brinson's garage, where they recorded that song. And that to me kicked off the golden age up until I say Everybody Plays the Fool in 1973 was about the end of the golden age in my book. Nobody has to agree with that, but that's how I look at rock and roll history, and all those guys who contributed, the Teenagers, the Drifters, the Beatles, Jerry and the Pacemakers, Dave Clark 5. Everybody added so much to our history because they added so much to our lives. And remember the little transistor radios that we got? Okay,
I still have some out in my garage somewhere.
You really? I wish I had mine. My
Yeah.
brother and I, my brother said, I'll put in $7. You put in $7, we'll buy one. So we bought one, and we had a fight over who's going to get it today. But we did, and holding it up to your ear and listening to the music wherever we went, those songs and those performers with us. Yeah.
Those were magical years, weren't they, Tom?
Oh, they help shape who we are, the values. I say that our emotions never get old. We get old. You look in the mirror and you go, who's the old guy staring back at me? But the emotions we felt as a 14-year-old kid, when you still hear those songs, when you still hear the Beatles, She Loves You, yeah, that's a silly song, really. It's not great music, but it's one of the best songs I've ever heard because of what it did to us, how it woke us up, and how it makes us. You hear it now, boom, take me right back to 64. And, that's 60 years ago in the blink of an eye. But I love all that music. Oh, yeah.
It's so amazing because as I talk to these legendary, incredible musicians, and most of them were in the golden era of music, the 60s. That's what you and I, we found a lot of our people to talk to, our interviews were the people that were making this happen. And what's interesting about their music is it's timeless. It never gets old. None of it, That's why I picked the song that I did of Petula Clark, starting off with Downtown, and I'll end it with another one that she did called Kiss Me Goodbye. But this music, I mean, every time you hear it, you're going, wow, I remember that. I remember what I was doing when that song was going on. Yeah, I was at a drive-in with my girlfriend, making out or whatever it was,
Yeah.
Yeah. These are things that you always remember. It always stirs up things, it stirs up the memories, and that's a lot of why I do what I do with this. I mean, this is my goal, is to keep the legacies alive for future generations. I don't want these memories to die out. I want them to still, maintain, to be out there for everybody to listen to hear their stories, to hear the wonderful music, how the music, came about, the inspiration for the music, where'd they get the ideas from. It's just solid gold memories, I love it.
I want the young kids that are growing up today, whose grandfathers, us, we experienced certain things, and we experienced the greatest music ever recorded. And I don't want that music to be cast aside. And I don't think it is. I see it coming back around. I see it being used so much. Now, we talked about, let's talk a little bit more about Petula, who I absolutely adore. I got to meet her several times over the years. She's not performing anymore, but Petula started off singing in the subways of London when it was being bombed by the Nazi Germans. And I just sent an email to her husband. I don't know if it's really her husband anymore, Claude Wolf, but he handles everything for her. And I said, I'm going to be going to London at the end of August, and I'm going to be doing some interviews there. And I want to find the subway where the exact spot was that Petula was singing to entertain the people who were dodging bombs that were falling all over London. And I also want to find her childhood home, because Les Reed, who wrote Kiss Me Goodbye, and he wrote Delilah for Tom Jones, and he wrote It's Not Unusual. He was the Dave Clark Five's musical director. And they first came to the United States 100 days after the Beatles did, and they played their first concert in the same place where the Beatles played their first concert in the United States. And Les and I had been corresponding up until his death. And he told me a story. He said, I've never told this to anyone, and Petula doesn't know this. I said, well, I'm going to be seeing Petula in a couple of weeks when she's coming to Ohio. And the story was this. Her house got bombed when she was a child, and it was damaged. It was a brick house, big brick house. I believe it was northeast of London. And he said, my father was a bricklayer. So he was contracted to go over there and to repair the house. I went with him. I carried bricks. I was 8 years old. So if that was 8 years old, it had to be 1943. Petula had to be 11 years old. He said, I didn't know Petula. I didn't know who she was. But we're working there on the house. After we finished our repair, I learned that was the home of this childhood, kind of like a Shirley Temple over there in England, Petula Clark. Well, how nice. He said, then 50 years later, I write this song, Kiss Me Goodbye, and she records it. So I was backstage at a concert, and I had met her manager. I met Petula before that, so I was able to come backstage, and I told Petula that story. I said, Petula, Les Reed told me this story about your home in West Owsley. She goes, East Owsley. She was right on top of it. She knew, and she wanted to correct me. And I told her about the damage to her house. She remembered that. And she remembered the repair. She didn't know that was Les Reed and Les Reed's father. I could see the tears. I could see her eyes getting moist. And I said, Petula, now it's getting me emotionally. I said, Petula, that is one of my favorite songs of all time. So we talk some more. We go out, we're sitting in the seats in the auditorium. Petula goes through her entire concert. And her piano player, Kenny Clayton, he runs down the chimes on his desk. And that was the start of Kiss Me Goodbye. She starts singing, we choose it, win or lose it. This is for you, Tom. I'll tell you, it melted my heart. I told that to Les Reed and said, look, I've seen her perform hundreds of times in concert over these decades. I've never seen her dedicate a song from the stage to anyone. I said, well, Les, it wasn't just me she was dedicating it to. It was the memory of you and what you did for creating that great music. So she used my name and she used my connection, but it was back to her childhood and to her home and to her parents and you, Sir Les Reed. I met Petula once the first time about 20 some years ago. We were at a concert and we're backstage, and I said, because my buddy was putting on a concert, I said to her manager, she's getting ready to leave. But she was nice to everybody. And she is standing next to me. And I said to his name was John. I said, John, do you think if I asked her to kiss me goodbye, she would? He goes, oh, I think she would. Ask her. So I looked at her and I said, my darling, kiss me goodbye. She put her arms around me. She sang into my right ear. We choose it, win or lose it. Love is never quite the same. I know I loved you. Now I lost you. And then she kissed my right cheek. And everybody's watching this. And I got a bit of a picture of that where my arms are out when she's approaching me and she's going to hug me. That was one of the highlights of my life, being kissed and hugged by Petula Clark in front of all these people. But I just adore the woman and her position in English history, American history, and rock and roll music.
She has a couple homes. She lives, I think, in Switzerland is one of them, right? Geneva or someplace. Is that right?
In Geneva and in London.
That's nice.
So I wrote to her husband and I told her I'm going to be in London. I'm hoping she'll be in the London apartment and write back to me. I'd love to see her in London. So that'll happen.
Of which you're going to be going to real soon, right?
2 months. Well, I'll be going there in 2 months. 1 month I'll be going to Los Angeles, and I never go anywhere without my video camera. So it's always running, and I'm going to get a lot on interviews, but I'm going to be going to the homes of the Beatles, and I'm going to be meeting with the original quarrymen who introduced Paul McCartney to John Lennon on July 6, 1957. They all attended the same school system, which was basically a big quad, different grades in different buildings. Paul was 18 months younger than John, so he was behind John in school, and he was in a different building. So out of the original quarrymen, 3 went to school with Paul, 3 went to school with John, but they all joined John's band. And on July 6th at that concert at St. Peter's Church, and I'm going to be going there. I'm going to be standing in the spot, and it's giving me chills now, knowing where these guys got together and they changed the world. And they introduced Paul to John because John played in the afternoon concert a song, 20 Flight Rock by Eddie Cochran, and he messed it up. So somebody said, wait a minute, our friend Paul, who we go to school with, 3 guys speaking, knows that song. He plays it, and he knows it very well. Let's go get him. Okay, because we got a concert again tonight, which is going to be in the gym, not out here in the school courtyard, but in the gym tonight. We'll do it again, and hopefully if this kid Paul schools us, we'll do it right. So they brought Paul over. And it's kind of funny because the story is that Paul restrung the guitar backwards so he could play it left-handed. And Rod Davis, who I interviewed, who was there, said, no, that didn't happen. That couldn't happen. It didn't happen. That's just myth. But I'm going to be meeting the guys who were there, all of them that are still surviving and playing at the end of August up in Liverpool. And then I'm going to go to the church, and I'm going to go to the houses where each one, you can't video inside the house. Well, that's okay. The outside, the sidewalks where these guys walked on their way, on their path through rock and roll and American history, that's enough for me. I'm going to walk the same path. So I'm excited about that. I'm looking forward to it.
That's so cool. You mentioned Eddie Cochran a minute ago. I've interviewed his nephew, Bobby Cochran, who is a real interesting fellow. Used to play with Steppenwolf. He's written some really neat stuff. And he and his Uncle Eddie, they were inducted into the rock and roll, rockabilly, under the Rockabilly Rock of Fame, I think is what it was, or rock and roll. Anyway, I think it was Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but also the Rockabilly Hall of Fame. Just about 5 or 6 years ago, they both made it at the same time, even though his uncle had passed. But anyway.
Do you remember? I'm sorry. Do you remember the name Sharon Shealy? She wrote Poor Little Fool, gave it to Ricky Nelson.
I think I've heard the name. I don't know.
Yeah, that was Eddie Cochran's girlfriend.
Oh, okay.
Now, David Somerville of the Diamonds told me that he dated Sharon Shealy for 18 months before they broke up, and then she dated Eddie Cochran. She was with him in the cab, in the back seat, when they ran into the utility pole and fell on Eddie and led to his death the next day.
Yeah.
So, but her son, Shannon, I got connections who are, I don't know everybody I say, but I know people who do know everybody. So they're hooking me up, going to connect me with her son. And I'd like to interview him about his mother. She was with Eddie Cochran when he died.
Well, of course, I'm hooking you up with a good friend of mine that's one of the most fantastic songwriters that I know right now, Stephen McClintock. In fact, did you reach out to him yesterday?
I did. I called, left a message. He got back to me, sent me a text, and he said, sorry, I can't talk right now, but we'll talk soon. Yeah. See, meeting people like you, the web just keeps getting bigger. And there are so many people who played a pivotal role in some aspect of rock and roll history that I'm getting to meet. So it's always fun, but it's always very useful to meet new people. It expands the horizon so much.
Well, he's anxious to visit with you, and I'm sure you'll have a great interview with him.
I call them, I never say these are interviews. These are just old friends. sitting
Yeah.
around talking about the music that we grew up with. An interview is really too kind of impersonal. I'm not here to reach into your mind, but the two of us sitting, we've experienced so much just from different perspectives, but we experienced the same history, the same music.
And that's what impressed me the most about when I first met you is that it was like, guy, here's a lost brother I never had, because I mean,
Yeah.
we even look alike, and of course
Oh yeah.
you don't wear glasses, but
Just for reading. Just for reading.
hey, yeah, there you go,
Yeah.
and we both have a love of music and everything. History was okay with me, but I think now that as
Yes.
I've matured and grown older, I do have a love of history. I used to be on the El Paso Historical Commission here, for several years, and like doing that. But I think music is really what it is for me. I just love the music. I love the stories. I love the entertainers. I love hearing how they got started and all of that. And of course, that's what you're doing.
And the great memories that they gave us. Like we talked the other night about Cannonsburg, Pennsylvania, and Perry Como.
Exactly. Of
Now,
which we're going to do a show on. We're going to Tom and I are going to do a show about the four coins. We're going to be talking about Jim. How do you say his last name?
Gregorakis.
Yeah,
Gregorakis.
Gregorakis, a great Greek,
Great.
a great
Yeah.
Greek entertainer, and we're going to show. I've got some amazing photos of him where he was playing sax, and then sitting next to him was Bobby Vinton playing sax also in the same high school orchestra. It was
Oh
amazing.
yeah. Yeah. In
Yeah,
Cannonsburg. Yeah. And that's, of course, Cannonsburg was basically owned by Perry Como, who was a generation before them. And this town just loved Perry. And then it gave way to the Bobby Vinton story and the Four Coins. Did you see the photograph of the Four Coins standing with Elvis down in Gulf Shores, Mississippi?
yes.
That's in 1956. Can you imagine? Elvis wanted to see them, and he came over to see them because they were traveling the world back in the 50s singing their songs.
That's so incredible. Yeah. That was my parents' kind of music, and I tell you, and I
Yeah.
and I loved it too. Oh my papa, and all these different songs that they used to do. I think the music gene definitely passed down to both of our kids because you were talking a little while ago about the new generation, and you want the kids to remember and know about what our music was in the past. But my daughter, uh, she's quite a musician herself, but she's a cellist, and
Oh,
but as she grew up as a teenager, Tom, she was loving stuff like Satchmo, and I mean, like, of course, Aretha, but that was early soul. I'm thinking about some of the others that she loved. I mean, but anyway, one day my wife was at Target or someplace getting some birthday gifts for my daughter, and I think she was probably around 13, maybe 14. And she's at the checkout counter, and the woman said, "Oh, you have great taste." And she said, "Well, this is for my daughter." Well, how old is she? And she's like 13, 14 years old, whatever it was. And she said, "Oh my gosh." And I think my daughter was just kind of, I don't know. It's amazing how she grew up loving the music that we loved. Um, it's I don't know, it's crazy. Of course, today, she still likes different things that I don't really listen to that much, but she does have a fine appreciation for these great songs that we grew up with and everything.
my son and my daughter said to me once that, Dad, you're stuck in the 60s. I said, well, you know what? It's not a bad place to be stuck. My first concert, I was 17 years old. I think I told you this. The Beatles. They
Yes,
came, they came to Cleveland, and that was the concert that was stopped for 55 minutes. And there's a well-known photo of a young girl. She's got long, hair down to almost her shoulders, and she's got Ringo by the left sleeve. And I see this, I can remember it in my mind. I can picture this. He picks up his two drumsticks in his right hand. He's about to strike her, but he looks at the police officer to his right. That cop ran across the stage in front of Ringo's drum kit, tackled that girl, took her to the ground, and Ringo escaped and got off the stage. And they all ran back to a trailer, and they only did 4 songs at that point. And then they came back out after almost an hour, and the announcement was made: if any person, even one, leaves their seat, this concert is over. So everybody behaved up until McCartney said, and they always close their songs with Little Richard. And now for our last song, well, it was like it was a setup. Now I'm in the upper deck, so I can look down and see everything. And I worked at that stadium, so I worked there, my brothers and I, for 11 years. So we knew that place inside and out. We could see what was happening. There was a limousine being brought in for them to jump into, and it came in through a gate in the right home run fence, and the gate was left open as though they were going to go back out but I could see the guys crouching behind the gate in the left field fence. They were going to open that up, and everybody ran towards that open right field fence. The Beatles went around to the other side where nobody was. Boom, they went out and they were gone.
Wow.
But it was something when they were kids now, walked out and took that stage. The place went nuts. And I've interviewed 2 of the acts that were opening acts for them. The Remains out of New York City, and then Don Daneman in The Circle. And
I have his cap right back here.
Oh, yeah, that's Don's cap.
Don sent it to me.
Oh, that's nice.
Oh, he's a sweetheart of a guy. He really is.
They are. And they were on the plane. They said the Beatles had their own compartment in the back. Paul came out and talked to everybody, and they all said they were tongue-tied. They didn't know what to say, but they enjoyed it and they had a good time when they first met Paul. And then, they up until Candlestick Park, they were on the stage with the Beatles for most of August. Yeah.
They're amazing, man. I mean, even today, my son has photographed Paul so many times. He's a photographer for Getty Images. And,
really?
And my last guitar player with my last band out in L.A., Danny Miller, he's the guy that runs front of house and also takes care of all the, I guess you could call him a kind of a show entertainment manager for Harrah's in San Diego. And he last year got to really rub elbows with Ringo, because Ringo was there with his all-star band doing a show in his room in the Harrah's there. And he said he was just the neatest guy. He was so nice. He drove him around the property and everything, and just was showing him the place and all that. But he just spoke nothing but high praises of Ringo and how approachable, how nice he was. So I'm hoping, fingers crossed, one of these days I'll be able to have a conversation with him. I'm not going to interview him, just two drummers talking,
Yeah. Yeah, just a conversation.
Yeah, just hey, how's it going this week? Hey, what's it like about being a Beatle? By the way, the reason why I put that up there today on the wall, because I did have my buddy Holly in the Crickets one up, but all these drum heads that I've got right now, there's a guy that I used to produce a show with by the name of Rod Crosby. We used to do an annual show called Border Legends of El Paso, and it was an annual rock and roll show that we did starting in 2009 up to 2016, and we brought in the bands from El Paso's past. Usually, most of the bands were 60s, 70s that really made a mark in El Paso, and a lot of them reunited after 40 years or so for the first time to come play our show, and they would come in from all over the country to be a part of our annual show. But anyway, these drum heads that I've got one for the Beatles. I've got the Bobby Fuller 4.
Bobby Fuller.
and I have the Buddy Holly and the Crickets, and those were all from our production, the Border Legend show. That these were the property of Rod Crosby, and his wife gave them to me to keep them alive in perpetuity. We lost Rod last year, and
How
one
old
of
was
my
he?
one of my dearest friends. He didn't die of old age. He had a brain bleed. He had
Was he our age? Was
yeah,
he
yeah,
in his
yeah.
70s?
He was a little older than me. He was I think Rod was, let's see, I'm 73.
I'm 74.
I think he was 77, 70. Yeah, I think he was 77, 78. And but yeah, just a tremendous friend, a fabulous musician. We shared the stage numerous times. He would always play with his band, Rod Crosby and the Intruders, in our annual show. But he took care of front of the house and the equipment, and I took care of the groups and promotions. So it was a happy marriage between he and I, putting on this production every year, and got to know a lot of people. I set him up with. I think one of the fondest moments I did, I had him on iHeartRadio one day on a local radio show that happens every Saturday called El Paso History Radio Show. And I had talked to Peggy Sue, Buddy Holly's Peggy Sue Guerin, and had her in Lubbock on a FaceTime. And we did a FaceTime in the studio with Rod there, and she didn't know I was going to do this. But I said, I want to do a FaceTime with you, Peggy, because I'm going to be on the radio Saturday morning. I'd like to, talk to you a little bit. And I had Rod there on guitar, his acoustic guitar, playing Peggy Sue to Peggy Sue. And I thought, yeah, we got that done. But fast forward to about a year or two later, I brought Peggy in from Lubbock to sell her book. And it's a great book. I've got it here somewhere. I don't know where it is right now. But anyway, I don't see it. But anyway, she was such a sweetheart. And we had a party for her the night before, like a neighborhood block kind of party thing. And she got to sell her book there and had food and drink and stuff. And then that night, the next day, that night, I walked her up to the stage. We had a chair sitting at a sub stage right below the stage where she could sit, and Rod Crosby and his band, the Intruders, played Peggy Sue to Peggy Sue live. And she said, that is one of the fondest moments I've ever had. She said, even when Buddy was doing his thing and I was there hundreds of times, she said, this has got to be right up there as one of the most momentous live music events, because one thing about Rod Crosby, he always tried to sound as close to the original as he could. He loved Bobby Fuller, first of all. Bobby offered him to be one of the Bobby Fuller Four, and he turned it down because he had other things that he was doing here locally and everything. But at one time, he could have been one of the Bobby Fuller Four. And but he loved Buddy Holly, he loved Bobby Fuller, he loved Johnny Cash. Those were his three main really favorite entertainers. But he'd always start off his shows with either That'll Be the Day or Peggy Sue. Those are both some that he really did well. But anyway, well, what else you got, man, on your end?
Well, like I said, the primary thing on my radar now is this trip to LA. And I'm really preparing for that. I'm going to be interviewing one of the original Four Preps, who's the only surviving member of the Four Preps, Bruce Bellend. And he was one of Ricky Nelson's best friends on the Ricky Nelson or Ozzie and Harriet show. And how many of those shows are really about Ricky and Ricky singing and James Burton playing and behind him
And John Beelan, one of my friends. He played guitar for Ricky Nelson also.
Is that right?
Yeah.
How does he spell his last name? Bell?
Beeland, Beland.
Okay, Bellend is.
He also played with Linda Ronstadt.
Oh yeah, you mentioned that to me. That's right. Yeah. So I'm going to be talking to him about his history. I'm going to be talking with the Blossoms.
Nice.
Now, Darlene Love is not going to be this, but Grace Jones and Fanita James The two of them, they talk about backing up Sam Cooke, backing up Bill Medley and Bobby Hatfield. Um, there's just so much music going through my mind right now. It's hard to focus on any one song. But we're going to be talking about those things, and they performed on Shindig, and trying to think of boy, I got 16 different people I'm going to be interviewing. But yeah, we're getting them all lined up, and everybody. And I'm going to stop and see Willie Chambers, of course, and,
Oh
and, and
yeah.
and another guy that I love to see when I go to California is Jerry Fuller, who wrote Traveling Man.
Oh yeah. Of course. When
Terrific.
when you see Willie, man, give him a hug, okay?
Oh, you know what? I always do. And I'll
Oh, yeah.
remember you when I do that. He's such, you said what a sweet guy he is. From the moment I met him, Willie and I were like, his birthday is the day after mine. He's 11 years older, but it's the day after mine. And we talk about being brothers. His birthday is actually the day after Superman's birthday. Superman's birthday is March 1st, 1938, when the Superman comics, when Jerry Siegel and Jerry Schuster, who don't live too far from here, when they wrote the Superman comics, that was 1938. Willie was born the day after Superman became an official comic book character. So I tease him about being related to Superman because of his birthday and my birthday.
That's
And
cool.
I was born in the same neighborhood on March 1st, 11 years to the day after Superman became born. I was born in a house 100 yards north of where Superman was created. So that whole neighborhood is it's got so much history. Jesse Owens, his house here in Cleveland, where he grew up when he did all of that in the 36 Olympics. The Wizard of Oz, the Wicked Witch, Margaret Hamilton,
Yeah.
she was born and raised 2 blocks away from Jesse Owens, right
Amazing.
right here in Cleveland. It's all the property is owned now by Cleveland Clinic. And you know where James Dean got into the knife fight at Griffith Observatory in Rebel Without a Cause? He got into a knife fight with a kid named, the character's name was Buzz Gunnerson, but it was really Corey Allen was his name. He grew up in that neighborhood too. He and I were born in the same hospital. So, and Jim Backus, Mr. Magoo, in Gilligan's Island, he was 3 miles north of there. It's a pretty interesting little conclave of a lot of history that came out of Cleveland. So, and Babe Ruth hit home run number 500 right there too. So,
How cool. How cool.
yeah, it's some good things happen in Cleveland. And Alan Freed, who wasn't born in Cleveland, he was born in Pennsylvania, came to Salem, Ohio, and then to Akron, Ohio, then up to Cleveland, where he started talking to a guy that owned Record Rendezvous, Leo Mintz, and his children and grandchildren and great grandchildren are still in the area. These guys launched rock and roll, took it to the public.
I got to ask you, Tom, you mentioned a name a minute ago, Bill Medley, who I think he's touring right now. I reached out to him the other day. And have you done an interview with Jennifer Warnes yet?
No, no, no. A friend of mine is setting up a Bill Medley, okay, for LA, which I'm excited about. I got to meet them back in the early 2000s. Bobby Hatfield died November of 2004, and I got to meet him a couple times before that. It was so sad to see him go. But he's got a good act now still.
Check him out with his daughter, man. His daughter can sing.
Mackenzie, yeah.
McKenna, yeah.
McKenna, I'm sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
Mackenzie.
McKenna is amazing. I mean, she's like 34, 35 years old. I mean, she performs at, in Branson. She's got her own show. Bill's usually a part of it, or she's a part of his show.
She just had a baby not too long ago.
Oh, did she? Okay.
Earlier this year. So yeah, he cut short his performances to be a grandfather there at the first time, I guess. So,
Well, they're from Newport Beach, California, and that's where I used to live when I took my very first show band on the road. Our keyboard player lived in Newport Beach, and his parents, and in fact, that's where we lived with them for a while, man. When we were out there practicing in their living room and putting our act together before we took it to the clubs there in L.A. But yeah, amazing history there with with all the people that grew up in our neighborhood out there in Newport Beach. I mean, Jose Feliciano was just up the street. Stevie Wonder was just up the street. Buddy Ebsen was just up the street. His wife, Buddy Ebsen's wife, used to dance with the mother of our keyboard player, Betty McKeever. She and Buddy Ebsen's wife belonged to a dance team together or something. I don't know what it was. It was like,
Well, Buddy was a dancer too. Yeah.
yeah, he was. But anyway, that was just such fond memories that I have, man, that go way, 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 way back. You
Oh, I
know.
love it. And I love talking about them with you. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah.
It's always good, man. And I guess we'll wind this thing down. I definitely am looking forward to doing the show with you with the four coins. Let me know when Jim gets back with you on that, and we'll get something scheduled and move along.
Well, I know
Also,
what'll happen. I know what'll happen. As soon as he calls me, he goes, "Let's do it tomorrow." That's what
Yep.
that's-
I'm good. Give me one day to prep for it a little bit. You know, get my homework done.
Oh yeah, I'm just teasing, but he's enthusiastic. He's 89 years old now. His father lived to be 2 weeks shy of 108.
Wow.
So he's got a lot of time. If we could put him off to a few more years from now.
We also need to talk a moment about the guy that you're going to be doing a podcast with. You know, talk about him a little bit, man.
Johnny Madera.
Yeah.
Johnny Madera. He wrote a song called "Do the Bop,"
Yep.
and Johnny started really music in Philadelphia. Johnny did a song called "Do the Bop," and they knew Bob Horn. Johnny knew Bob Horn, had American Bandstand before he got thrown out, and Dick Clark took over on August 5th of 1957. So with Bob Horn gone, they went over to Dick Clark and they said, "Dick, I got this song, Do the Bop." And he said, "Well, you know what? The bop, doing that dance, it's passe. It's out. It's gone. Change it to At the Hop." So Johnny was already under a recording contract. He was on Prep Records. So he heard these kids singing out his window one night called the Juvenaires. And he said, "Hey, I got to meet those guys. How do I find the Juvenaires?" "Oh, Dave White. There's Dave White." So he went over and talked to Dave White. And Dave says, "Yeah, I'll introduce you to these guys." So he introduced him to Danny Rapp, Frank Maffei, and Joe Terry. So they said, "Let's record this new song. I'm under contract. I would sing lead, but I'm going to let you sing lead, Danny, because I can't be on the record. I got a contract with a guy named Artie Singer." So they recorded At the Hop. And that started everything. Johnny and Dave White also wrote "You Don't Own Me" for Leslie Gore and a lot of other big songs. He put Daryl Hall and John Oates together, Hall and Oates, and Leon Huff. It was his keyboard player. He brought Leon Huff here to Cleveland. When they rehearsed other groups, Johnny recorded so many groups. Leon Huff and Kenny Gamble, they formed Philadelphia International Records, Backstabbers, Me and Mrs. Jones, Tommy Bell, all that. That is several more podcasts. And Johnny and I talk about these on his podcast, and we'll talk about it on yours too. People should know this musical history and who's still alive and who created it. Johnny just turned 87 years old.
That's amazing. How soon you guys going to launch that show? Because I would definitely want to do some stuff with you all.
Well, we got several of them in the can already, and I wanted to get a few more in the can before we launch it, so that when people see Johnny's always busy. So Johnny will disappear for several days and can't do a show because they're interviewing him in Australia. They're interviewing him all over the world. So I want to get several in the can before we launch it, so that when people go looking for it, they don't see, if they saw I Love Lucy on TV this week and they didn't have another Lucy program coming out until next month, people would lose interest. So
Yeah.
once it hits, I want to have several for people to see until Johnny can, but the guy is in demand and he's recognized around the world for what he's done. So
Where does he live? Where does he live, Tom?
He lives in Cambria, California. And I did an interview with him on his porch about 13 years ago. And the background is the Pacific Ocean. You go down his steps,
Nice.
cross over the road, and that's the Pacific. So I said, Johnny, you're there at the Pacific Ocean. I'm here in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame city and Alan Freed's hometown. So, it's kind of a long throw, but we love doing it. So we're having a good time. I'll talk to Johnny. I'll talk to him by tomorrow, and we'll get on your show real soon. So between him and Jim Gregorakis, and there are other guys, we can get the Times on here. Wonderful, and there's so many other performers that are still alive, and we gotta record their history before they're gone.
We really do. Tom, this has been great, my friend. I really enjoyed this.
A lot of fun.
A lot of fun, and we'll keep it going. And let's just call it. Let's call it.
Okay, buddy. All right, we'll keep in touch, and I'll see you soon.
Okay, thank you, man.
All
Take
right.
care. God bless.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
We choose it, win or lose it. Love is never quite the same. I love you, now I've lost you. Don't feel bad, you're not to blame. So kiss me goodbye, and I'll try not to cry. All the tears in the world won't change your mind. There's someone new, and she's waiting for you. Soon your heart will be leaving me behind. Linger a while, then I'll go with a smile, like a friend who just happened to call. For the last time, pretend you are mine, my darling. Kiss me goodbye. I know now I must go now, though my heart wants me to stay. That girl is your tomorrow. I belong to yesterday. So kiss me goodbye, and I'll try not to cry. All the tears in the world won't change your mind. There's someone new, and she's waiting for you. Soon your heart will be leaving me behind. Linger a while, then I'll go with a smile, like a friend who just happened to call. For the last time, pretend you are mine.